What is good, everyone? Welcome to the channel. My name is Paul and I make videos about Japanese society, life, and culture from the viewpoint of a long-term foreign resident. I've been in Japan going on 19 years. And today I'm talking to anyone who might be considering buying land, moving to Japan, living here, building a house, or buying an already existing house. I want to give you some tips and tricks, basically information that you should consider when buying land in Japan, in terms of where you want to look and things you want to look out for. I'm going to divide this into two parts. The first part is very brief. I'm just going to talk very quickly about if you're planning to build in Japan or buy land in Japan and you have children or you plan to have children. I have one point that you should consider that you maybe have never thought of before. After that, I'm going to get into the main part of the video, which is talking about how to protect yourself in the case of natural disasters in Japan, i.e. finding plots of land that are relatively safe compared to others in Japan. Because while Japan is famous for having remarkably low human-on-human crime, the amount of nature-on-human crime in Japan is pretty high. So let's get into it. Okay, first of all, if you have children or you're planning on have children while you're living in Japan and you're going to build or buy a house, one thing you should really check out, and I'm not going to talk about things that you probably already have on your radar, like is it close to a school or close to children's clinics or something like that. I think that's pretty much well known. But the one thing you maybe haven't thought about is, what is the makeup of the neighborhood you're moving into? Japan has an incredibly aging population. It's a lot of elderly people. And a lot of people moved into the same developed neighborhoods at the same time back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, etc. So there are a lot of neighborhoods in Japan where, frankly, everyone around you might be at retiree age or older. And if that's the case, your children aren't going to have anyone to walk to school with, maybe no immediate friends in the neighborhood to play with. The local park might be kind of like a ghost town. And that's something you kind of want to suss out when you come and you look at a neighborhood in Japan. We went through this process about 7 years ago. Our kid was 5 years old, so not yet in elementary school. And there were a couple of neighborhoods I remember specifically where they just seemed dead at 3 p.m. in the afternoon when most kids would be walking home from school. And looking at the local parks, they're overgrown and don't look well used. So we figured, okay, everyone in this neighborhood, their kids are probably all grown and moved away, and so as a result, our kid would be very lonely living here. So definitely something to consider. Get the vibe of the neighborhood, look at the local parks nearby. Do they look like they're used? Are there any kids there? I recommend actually going at about 2 to 3 p.m. to check out a plot of land, because then you can see, are there any children coming home from school at that time? And are they coming into that neighborhood? Okay, let's move on to the real main thrust of this video, which is how to prevent as much damage and danger as possible in a natural disaster in Japan by choosing the right plot of land and house to put on it. Okay, today's focus is specifically on the land, and I'm going to start with the area that you build should not be landfill, or what they call reclaimed land. There is a lot of landfill in Japan. A lot of Tokyo, Yokohama, Chiba, they've filled in the swamp area and parts of Tokyo Bay to create more land to build on. Odaiba, where there's lots of entertainment areas, parks and things in Tokyo, is famous as being basically a completely landfill island. And as such, it's less stable in the case of an earthquake. All you have to do is look at the videos of the March 11th earthquake 2011. Look at the videos at Disneyland and watch how the pavement cracks and how everything's moving. Landfill just isn't as stable. And there's more of it than you might actually think. This is illustrated by a conversation I had with a man who's actually a Shinto priest in Yokohama. He was telling me about when he was a boy, and that shrine, part of their yearly festival was they would actually take the portable shrine from the shrine grounds and they'd carry it down into the water of Tokyo Bay as part of the ceremony. These days, his shrine is over 2 kilometers from Tokyo Bay. They don't do that anymore because it's a big hike just to get to the water in the first place. That's all become landfill. So definitely do research into that. You don't want to build on landfill. And part of that consideration is not just earthquakes, but landfill settles differently, meaning your house could settle slightly tilted, or the apartment building even that you're living in might settle tilted. It's actually pretty common practice in Japan to take like a small ball or a marble when you're checking out houses or apartments, and you place it on the floor and let it roll. And if it keeps rolling to the same corner again and again, you probably have something really, something that's settled unnaturally and is tilted. The second tip I would give is also related to this. It's actually still talking about landfill, but most people associate landfill in Japan with things like Tokyo Bay or the ocean, like the shoreline. But in fact, there's lots of landfill in the interior of Japan as well. Ponds and lakes and streams that have been filled in to create land that is then built upon. So when we were looking for land, I actually came across my wife sitting at our kitchen table with a huge map spread out in the areas that we were looking for land, basically. And this is not on the internet. This was still, she had an actual paper map that she'd spread out. And I asked her what she was doing, and she said she was looking at the areas that we were considering and looking for anything that said, or any kanji characters rather, basically the Chinese characters that meant water or pond or lake. Because as she explained, there's lots of places where ponds have been filled in, and the area is still called such and such pond, but there's no pond there anymore, which means that it's landfill, and you might end up building your house on that landfill. So my second tip is to look at a map, look up the necessary characters. I'll put some of them on the screen here, but look up the necessary characters for like pond and lake and stream and just the water kanji. And if you see any of those and it isn't immediately apparent that there actually is water there somewhere, it might be landfill, and you probably want to avoid that. Tip number 3, still on the water theme, but now we're talking about rivers. Japan is often hit by a lot of flooding, very considerable amounts of flooding. We have a rainy season here, we have typhoons that go through, and in the past 10 years and years going back time immemorial, Japan has a lot of problems with flooding. And as such, you don't want to be close to a river because your area might be next. It might be possible. And even if you go to the area and you're looking at the land and you see the river and you look down, it's like just a little trickle of water in there and you think, that's never going to flood. You never know. You don't know what it looks like in the rainy season, for example, or after a typhoon has gone through. So avoid being close to water in general, not just the ocean or lakes, but rivers as well, because Japan gets a lot of rainfall. This is not a country that has problems with wildfires really at all because it's always wet and rainy, and as such, floods are instead the disaster you have to watch out for. Okay, tip number 4, still talking about rain. Japan is a place where you don't want to build on a hillside, either at the top of the hill or at the bottom, because landslides are something that happen all the time. My wife was adamant that we were not going to be building anywhere near the side of a hill, either at the top or at the bottom. And, in Yokohama where we live, that's really hard because Yokohama is very, very hilly. And if you just explore around Yokohama, you'll see lots of houses built on top of really high ridges and built on top of structures or right underneath really steep looking hills with these staircases going up, etc. And as such, it seems perfectly normal, but I would highly recommend against it because there have been landfalls, like landslides in our area where we live. It gets reported on the news, a typhoon goes through, or we have a really heavy rainfall for over a week, and a hillside just gives way. I remember watching this horrible footage of a hillside in Hokkaido that just fell down essentially and buried an entire neighborhood that was at the bottom of it. Basically, avoid being right on the edge of a hillside, either at the bottom or at the top. One final tip, and this one is especially important if you're going to live in a place like Yokohama where this is common, but there are a lot of plots of land that were developed back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and there was landscaping done so that the actual plot is, meter or a meter and a half above the street level, and there's a big, I don't know what you call it, an embankment that has been encased in concrete or in stone. Sometimes it looks really nice because there will be like a garage that's been carved into the hillside, so it's like, oh, that would be convenient, I can put my car in there. The problem is, anything that was constructed a few decades ago is not up to building code and is considered like eroded and not safe. So those plots of land actually end up being more expensive because you're required, before any building company is going to build on them, you're required to redo that entire landscaping. The embankment, you probably have to destroy whatever, garage space is there and create it anew or just fill it in, because it won't be considered up to modern code. And as such, you're going to have to spend thousands of dollars to get that fixed before you'd even be allowed to build on it. So that is a final concern, not natural disaster per se, although, it is related to that. It's considered not safe if an earthquake were to happen. But basically, these man-made embankments that the houses are then built on top of are not considered safe, and you'd have to redo them. Okay. If you have any questions or further comments about the content today, by all means comment below. I really appreciate you taking the time to watch this video, and I hope it was informative and useful if you're planning to come to Japan, buy a house, buy land. I know that it's really a popular thing these days because real estate markets abroad are really expensive and Japan is not so expensive, not to mention that the yen is really weak right now, and you've got all of the Akiya or abandoned houses that are popular because you can get them for almost no money whatsoever. So I understand the popularity and where people are coming from when it comes to wanting to build in Japan or have a house here. But please be aware that Japan is a country of natural disasters, and the tips I've given you are meant to help you mitigate those risks. So again, thank you for watching this particular video. Like, subscribe, check out the podcast. I have a Patreon, all those good things. But at any rate, thanks for watching, and I will catch you on the next one. Peace.